Sten, we're live.
Hey, thanks to Larry the Liberty Guy. Imagine this. Imagine the scenario, the likely scenario, that Rhode Island voters this November will overwhelmingly support the Democrat presidential candidate, Joe Biden, in November 2020 over President Trump by the same 54% to 39% margin as they voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016. I just imagine that for a minute. Now imagine the possible scenario that our state's 4 electoral votes, instead of going to Joe Biden, will go to President Trump. How would you feel about that? If you're a Democrat who voted for Biden, how would you feel about that? One scenario that could happen if the Electoral College were to be bypassed or eliminated. Welcome to In the Dugout. I'm Mike Stenhouse, your host, and this is our in-depth chat with friends who join me in the dugout, as I used to do as a former ball player, and we just chat about life, whatever came up. So today we have a very special guest, someone who you've seen out of the dugout, right out there on the front lines on TV quite a bit. Hans von Spakovsky is an oft-cited expert on a variety of election and legal issues by multiple major news organizations. So as we bring Hans into the picture, let me tell you a little bit about him. Hans is a former member of the Federal Election Commission. He is currently the manager of the Heritage Foundation's Election Law Reform Initiative. President Trump named him to be a member of his Presidential Advisory Commission on Election Integrity. And Hans was hired to the Justice Department, I think, during the Bush administration, H.W. Bush, as an expert on elections. Hans, welcome to In the Dugout.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, now you know our tradition. We ask our guests to wear a cap. What do you got for me today?
I have a cap from the place I work, which is the Heritage Foundation.
All right, bet you've never worn a cap before in an interview, right now.
Not in an interview, but in my car. When I'm driving my car, I do.
Okay, fair. Not on a. Now, for my cap, I got to zing you a little on this, Hans. I saw in your bio, you're an MIT grad?
I am.
I was your Cambridge rival, so I'm going with the Harvard cap today to counter your MIT brilliance, okay?
We used to call that the Little Red Schoolhouse down the road.
Oh, but no, you don't want me to get into the little chant we used to do for the MIT nerds, do you?
No, probably not.
3.14659 cosine secant tangent sine. Ever hear that one?
I have heard that, yes.
All right. Hey, listen, we're talking today about the Electoral College. Thanks for being a good sport. Alexander Hamilton, James Madison worked very hard to create and defend the Electoral College as part of the United States Constitution. The process is very democratic. It's a little bit complex, admittedly, but it seems to have worked in solving its major goal. Yet today there are many who want to undo it. So before we get into that, and we'll go through the website in a second, but tell us why the Electoral College was formed the way it was.
Well, the framers of the Constitution were afraid that if they had a national popular vote system, then the smaller parts of the country, the more rural areas, the less populated areas would basically be ignored by presidential candidates. They would simply go to the big cities, the urban areas, which were along the coast, and the rest of the country, which today, as you know, media elites like to refer to as flyover country, would just simply be ignored. With the Electoral College system, which basically means each state gets the number of Electoral College votes equal to its representation in Congress. So even the smallest state, which only may have 2 senators and 1 member of Congress, still gets 3 votes. And what that means is that you can win the presidency in this country if you campaign all over and you get the smaller states to combine their votes for you. Plus, the other point of this was they didn't want a national election. They wanted a series of regional elections because, as you know, this country is so geographically dispersed, so different in the different parts of the country.
And diverse.
And this way, go ahead.
Oh, and diverse,
Yeah, and this way, candidates basically are forced to go all over the country seeking votes. And if that, look, that is just as true today, if not more true, because if we switch to a national popular vote system, in essence, uh, candidates could just go to New York, Los Angeles, the cities along the east and west coast, Chicago, and just ignore the rest of the country.
Your organization, the Heritage Foundation, put out a tremendous booklet just recently. And let me just scroll down before we go through it quickly. I want to show our viewers that our center right here is proud to be one of the presenting endorsers of this. We are big believers in the Electoral College. We fought against the national popular vote legislation. We'll get into that in Rhode Island a few years about that. Why don't we just very quickly just summarize some of the key parts? So you pretty much just described the founder's design. Anything else we should add right there?
Yeah, look, I mean, one of the things that people complain about is that, oh, the candidates, they spend too much time in what they call the battleground states. And the folks pushing this national popular vote system say, oh, this will ensure that people will go to these smaller states to try to gather up that population. No, actually, the opposite is true. They'll really ignore the smaller, more rural parts of the country and just go to the big cities. And what I think people forget is that, listen, battleground states change. You know, states today that are battleground states that get a lot of attention, not too long ago weren't battleground states. They were strongly for one party or another. Don't forget, California, which today is just overwhelmingly Democratic, was the place where Ronald Reagan got elected.
Ronald Reagan won that state, didn't he?
Yeah. So battleground states actually change, thus changing the focus of a lot of presidential candidates. The big cities don't change, with very rare exceptions. They just get bigger.
Well, that's one of the myths, that only these 8 or 9 states are always in play. Well, maybe in any given year, but it's not always those 8 or 9. I think you showed that all but 10 or 11 states in recent decades have been battleground states. Okay. Yes. You take us through how the Electoral College actually works. If you can just summarize this page very quickly.
Well, very quickly, when people go to vote in November, they're actually voting for a slate of electors who have pledged to vote for either the Republican or the Democratic presidential candidate. And whichever candidate gets the majority of the votes in that particular state, that candidate's electors are the ones who then go to the State House early in December and actually cast the formal votes of the Electoral College of who will be the president. In the entire history of the United States, only a small handful of electors have broken their pledge and not voted for the candidate they promised to vote for. And just last year, just this year, the U.S. Supreme Court actually held in a case over electors who broke their pledge that, in fact, the states can punish them, can fine them, can nullify their vote if they break their pledge.
And I think I saw that there were 7 of those last year, 5 for Trump, 2 for Hillary, who didn't vote the way they were elected to vote. Let's see. Let's look here. So we look at how it worked. You take us through a history of some of the very few, like you mentioned, disputed elections we've had in here. We won't go into that now. I just want to let voters know what they're going to see. And then I think this is the key page, and you've already hit upon some of these, the benefits of the Electoral College. Listen, we are a federalist system. We have a federalist system that comprises pretty much our Congress, and the Senate and the House. And it just matches, right? That we have a federalist system when it comes to electing our president.
Yeah, and I think a lot of folks try to compare us to places like, Western Europe and elsewhere. And they seem to forget that we are a federal system. Our state governments are independent sovereigns. They are not just subdivisions of the federal government. And thank goodness for that. And actually, we are more of a democratic system than the supposed democracies in Europe that people are always saying, oh, we should be like them. Because what do? We actually vote directly for the electors who then pick the president. In all of the EU and the parliamentary systems, voters don't vote for who their prime minister is going to be. They simply vote for the members of their parliament,
Right.
and then the members of the parliament decide who's going to be the prime minister. So we actually, we are, I know we're a republic, but we have a more direct democracy than all these other countries that
Well, that's a
liberals
great
always want
point.
us to copy.
I never thought of that before. That's a great point. All right. Now, you also mentioned in the booklet that the Electoral College, this is the big talk this year, discourages voter fraud.
Yes.
Which is a big concern, well, at least by those of us on the right. How does it eliminate voter fraud, or discourage anyway?
Well, look at it this way. Look, California and New York are basically solidly Democratic states. You know, we pretty much know, unless things change, that their electoral college votes are going to go for the Democratic candidate. So there's no incentive for those who are willing to stuff ballot boxes or to cheat to stuff the ballot box in the presidential race, because it's not going to make any difference in the national election where they already know the state's going to go that way. But if we switch to a national popular vote system, then every fraudulent vote they can come up with in places like California or Philadelphia or other places that are basically one-party towns, every vote they can come up with might help them win the national election. And what is the worst place and easiest place for fraud to occur? As I said, in one-party jurisdictions, where the other party isn't there to have poll watchers, to work in the polls, to try to make sure that fraud is not occurring.
So if there is fraud within the electoral system, it's limited to the electoral votes of that state. It can't impact the presidential election any more than that, correct?
Right. That's exactly right. So like I said, it acts as a deterrent. And listen, think about the recount we had.
I know.
In
I'm just going to bring that up. Well, go ahead.
Oh my goodness.
Explain.
Yeah, look, in 2000, we had a very contentious recount down in Florida, one state, because who won the presidency depended upon the electoral college votes of that one state. So we did a recount there. Well, if we had a national popular vote system and we'd had it back then, we wouldn't have just had a recount in Florida. There would have been lawsuits filed all over the country trying to get a recount in almost every state. Why? Well, because every extra vote you could find all over the country might make the difference in the election. And it would, you know, we were delayed.
Or that you could manufacture.
Or that you could manufacture, right. And it would just be confusion and chaos, particularly because the recount rules are different in every single state. So
what a mess. Yeah, we talked about that during our hearings, that what a mess a recount would be.
It would.
Instead of just looking at one state, we had to look at every state, because you're right, every vote would matter in that regard towards the whole enchilada, not just towards your state's electoral votes. Right. And one other interesting thing under your debunking myths and misinformation section that I never knew before, and I studied this quite a bit. We had to testify years ago when this legislation was in our state. You talked about how it actually, there's a myth that the Electoral College protected slavery, but you show how the southern states actually opposed the Electoral College system for a large part when it came to voting on the Constitution. Explain all that, since this is a big, also another big issue in today's culture.
Yeah, look, the two biggest states, north and south of the Dixon line, who owned slaves at the time of the convention, the Constitutional Convention, were New York and Virginia. According to the, I think it's the 1790 census, if you took out the slave population, Virginia still had a larger population of free individuals who could vote in the election. So the idea that somehow the Electoral College system gave the southern states more votes, it just doesn't work, particularly because at the time of the convention, slavery was legal in every single state.
All right. First of all, let me remind our viewers, if you're, depending on where you're watching, please, like this or share it or subscribe to our YouTube channel, whatever the case may be. That way you can be notified of great interviews like the one we're having with Hans in the future. All right. So the next thing, we'll just take a quick look here, just to show everybody for a minute. On your website, you also get into this national popular vote, which is pretty much considered the anti-electoral college proposal. And we fought against this legislation. I'm going to do some Rhode Island math in a minute on this. But what a strange concept this is. So talk about it from a concept, again, quickly. I know it's complex, but then could it really constitutionally happen if enough states signed on? Go ahead.
Well, I think there are big constitutional problems with it. But in essence, after the 2000 election, a frustrated Al Gore elector went back to California. He's a multimillionaire. And he started this organization called the National Popular Vote, Inc. And what they came up with was a way of trying to get around, supposedly, the amendment process of the Constitution to basically negate the Electoral College without actually amending the Constitution. And what they came up with was what's called a state compact. A state compact is a contract between states. Most often state compacts are used when two states negotiate how they're going to use the water in a river that flows between two states. But in this case, the National Popular Vote Compact basically says each state's legislature, each state that adopts the National Popular Vote Compact agrees that once enough states have passed this compact such that they represent 270 combined electoral college votes, that's how much you need to become president, they agree that from then on in every presidential election, they will award their state's electoral college votes not to the candidate who a majority of the electorate voted for in their state, but to whoever won the national popular vote. So the example you were giving earlier, right? If everybody in your state basically voted for Biden, but Donald Trump won the national popular vote, your state's electoral college votes would defy
the will of the people, right?
The will of the people, and instead it would go to Donald Trump.
And in this Democrat state, that wouldn't. Yet that scenario, yet they still passed it, a Democrat General Assembly. So, and now here's one thing that's interesting. All right, so to me, this is nothing but typical petulant politicians who aren't happy they lost fair and square according to the rules, and they just want to change the rules because they're petulant little babies. That's just my view of it. I didn't say that during testimony, but that's my view of it. But it wasn't just Al Gore and the Democrats who were behind this. We were lobbied in this state, and I refused to go along, by a friend of mine, a lawyer, from Republicans in the Midwest who also saw no way for Republicans to break through the, quote, electoral wall that the Democrats had built. After Obama had won his first election, there's no way we can win the Electoral College again. So therefore, we as Republicans want to change this. And it was Republicans who pushed this through in Rhode Island. What's your knowledge of that? Because it wasn't just Al Gore.
I've been dealing with the NPV folks now for years, and I've debated them in numerous states. And here's what you need to know. The NPV, they had a lot of luck passing the NPV in red states controlled by Democrats, but they've had problems passing them in Republican-controlled states. So what the NPV Inc. has done is, look, they have a lot of money behind this organization. So what they started doing was hiring the most respected Republican lobbyists in particular states, and they've hired a lot of ex-Republican state legislators to work as lobbyists. I can guarantee you that the Republican you were dealing with was being paid as a lobbyist by them. In fact, You remember Senator Fred Thompson
Of
of
course, yep,
Tennessee,
yep.
who was on,
Submarine commander. I loved him. Yep.
right? I actually
As an actor,
debated
yeah.
him. I
Oh,
debated him about 10 years ago on this issue because he was being paid by the NPV folks to push the National Popular Vote plan. So I can pretty much guarantee you any Republican you run into, particularly
yeah. They were
Republican
they were
lobbyists,
mercenaries, no
they,
question about it.
they are being
Yeah.
paid to do this.
Here's the policy brief we put out before we had any good branding back in 2012 against the popular vote that we gave. And I want to do a little math here, and to show you how in our state anyway, how stupid it was, because the Electoral College actually protected small states like ours. It actually
Right.
gave small states like ours more clout. So I'm going to share this little thing. This was from an opinion piece I wrote back in 2012, and I just updated it with current statistics. So under the electoral system, and if you skip down here a little bit, we have about 1 million residents out of 326 people. If we went to a national popular vote system, Rhode Island voters would have 0.307% clout. That's how much our voters. Under the electoral system, because we get 4 out of those 538, we have a 0.743% of the clout of the total say. More than twice as much clout under the electoral system than we have on, yet our stupid lawmakers passed the national, weakening by over 50%, almost 60%, weakening Rhode Island's voice in presidential elections. I mean, this Electoral College was designed specifically with small states like ours in mind, right?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And in fact, about a year ago, like I said, this bill has had no problem passing in blue states, I should say. I think I said red states before. In blue states, democratically controlled states, until about a year ago. And about a year ago in Nevada, the democratically controlled legislature actually passed the National Popular Vote Plan, and the Democratic governor, to his great credit, vetoed it.
Wow.
And he specifically said the Electoral College protects smaller, less populated states like Nevada, and that if this law went into effect in Nevada, it would weaken their influence in the national election. So, like I said, lots of credit to the Nevada Democratic governor. He actually vetoed the plan. They're recognizing exactly what you just said.
It's not that hard.
No, it's not.
I mean, their argument was one. You remember their argument. What was it? One person, one vote. Your vote needs to count at the national level, at the local level. It's like your vote doesn't count at the local level somehow, at the statewide level. I mean, that's just crazy thinking, right? I mean,
right. Well, obviously, then
you have a bigger chance at the local level of affecting something than at the national level. The state.
Well, then they must obviously also be being in favor of getting rid of the United States Senate, because as a small state, you guys have 2 senators to represent you the same way the biggest states like California and Texas does. And if they think the National Popular Vote Plan is the way you have to go, then aren't they against the U.S. Senate, which was also designed to protect smaller states from the tyranny of the majority, which is what you basically get in the House of Representatives.
Yeah, we have a 2% voice in the Senate, even though we have a 0.307% total population voice. So you're right, exactly right. All right, one more question on the Electoral College. And then if you have time, one question on larger voter fraud. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure, of course.
All right, so there's a movie that I know your team has recommended that we promote as well, or learn more about. It's called Safeguard, an Electoral College story. What do you know about this movie, and why should people watch it?
Well, this is a really great, it's a really good movie. It's a documentary, but it's a very interesting documentary all about the Electoral College and why we put it in, and how effective it's been in throughout our history, and why we should safeguard it even today. And I think a lot of people should keep this in mind. the United States is unique in one particular way. We have peacefully handed over power at the end of every 4 years or every 8 years, even in some of the most contentious times, peacefully. That kind of stability in your central government is unusual in the world. It's unusual in world history. And those who want to change that system, the Electoral College system, they just haven't made the case that we should basically risk the stability that the Electoral College system has given us for their new idea of how they think it ought to be done.
You're also an expert, having served on election commissions and a lawyer yourself and studied this for years, now representing the finest conservative research organization in the world with the Heritage Foundation on these issues.
Thanks.
And thank you for all your work on that, by the way. And do enjoy seeing you on TV. When's your next scheduled event, by the way? When are you going to be on next?
I'm not sure.
Okay. All right. Anyway, you guys have an active website, voter fraud.
Right.
We're going through, we've weakened our absentee ballot process this year by no more, I don't know if you're aware of that, by no longer requiring witness signatures or a notary.
Right. Which is a very unwise thing to do.
Very unwise. Because of the COVID crisis, obviously. But they say, there's no such thing as voter fraud. Does voter fraud exist? Have there been convictions? Have there been criminal and civil penalties awarded?
Yeah, the answer is yes. And
yes, and yes.
Yes. Look, a couple of years ago, we started a database because I got tired of hearing that at the Heritage Foundation. It's available on our website.
There it is.
And look, this is only proven cases, and it's not a comprehensive listing. It's just a sampling of cases. And by proven, I mean somebody was convicted in a court of law or a court ordered a new election. And I can tell you, this is just the tip of the iceberg.
1,296 cases of proven voter fraud, 1,120 criminal convictions, but it doesn't exist.
Right. And look, some of those are cases of one voter doing something, and others are cases like one from Miami in 1997, in which the judge said that there were 5,000 fraudulent absentee ballots cast. And unfortunately, too many prosecutors aren't interested in investigating these cases or prosecuting them. And so, like I said, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Look, just within the last month, four locals have been criminally charged in Paterson, New Jersey, after they switched to all-mail elections with absentee ballot fraud. The U.S. Attorney in North Carolina just indicted 19 aliens for illegally registering and voting elections. And the Secretary of State of Georgia just released a press release saying that they found 1,000 people in Georgia who voted twice in their August primary election.
1,000 people voted twice. That was just recent, right?
Yes. In mid-August, by voting through with an absentee ballot and then showing up in person to vote too.
Now, I have a challenge for you.
Yeah.
Now, you got a map where you show instances of convictions or whatever, instances. Right. But if we click on Rhode Island, nothing. We know it exists here. See?
Right.
So,
but part of the problem is finding it. Finding the cases. And like I said, part of the problem too is prosecutors just not willing to do anything about it. And I'll give you a quick example of that.
That's true too.
Look, I was actually on a county election board in Virginia some years ago, and we discovered that almost 300 aliens, non-citizens, had illegally registered in the county. About half of them had actually voted in our elections. We took them off the voter list, sent their information to our local prosecutor, because it's a felony in Virginia to do that. What do you think our local prosecutor did about it?
Yeah,
absolutely nothing.
Stuck his or her head in the sand, I imagine, right?
Yeah, they did nothing about it. And I can cite you numerous other cases that I know about personally of potential fraud that prosecutors just ignored and did nothing about.
So your booklet you just put out, the Essential
Right.
Electoral College, is that available to the public online, or
It
how
is.
how can they get to it? Because I read through the whole thing again this morning. It's a brilliant,
Yes,
simple read. Take you about 15 minutes.
it
Where can
is.
they get it?
It is available on our website electronically, and we have actually printed. Something people don't do that much these days. We've actually printed up a lot of copies, and we are distributing them. In fact, I think we sent you all.
Yes, I've got
You're,
2 boxes, and so a couple messages. So that's heritage.org. Just
right,
Google heritage.org, the Essential Electoral College.
right.
Um, to our viewers, remember, like, share, or subscribe, whatever however you're viewing this. And if you're a friend of our center, you're right. I don't know how many are in those boxes. I got 2 pretty good sized boxes full of these great pamphlets here. And I would love to, next time we're at a group event when that's allowed again, or we can meet up, let me know. I'll be happy to distribute these, because this is important. Americans understand how we elect
Yeah.
the president, and not get caught up in this populism that's seeming to go against it. It's amazing how these bad ideas can catch fire in the left and in the media today. And do you have any solution on how we can tamp that down?
Look, all I know of is doing what you and I are doing here today. We're just trying to educate the electorate on the real side of these kind of issues, so that they don't listen to some of the frankly foolish claims that you hear, like the Electoral College was put in to protect slavery, which just isn't true.
All right. Hans von Spakovsky, thank you for being my guest. And In the Dugout, to our viewers out there, if we're in the dugout and we're ball players, we need fans. So we need you to subscribe, like, or share this broadcast. Hans, thank you for being with us. Good luck on distributing this very important booklet, and we'll hope to talk to you soon.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Thank you, sir. We're In the Dugout. This is Mike Stenhouse. We'll see you next game. Take care.